Hello, you're very welcome back to the Under Center podcast. Dara here with you. We are continuing our preview for the 2023 NFL season. Again, we are focusing on one single team, and today's team is the Seattle Seahawks. Joining me on the show to look ahead to the Seahawks season, we are delighted to be welcoming Dan Viens from the Seahawks Forever Podcast. Dan, how are you, sir? It's great to have you on.
I'm good. It's always good to be on with people from the other side of the world, and always good to talk Seahawks football.
Absolutely. And you're in good company today because you have two fellow Seahawks fans here with you, and one slightly disgruntled and always pissed off Commanders fan down there in the bottom right corner.
Commanders for now, right? We don't know. We don't know how that's all going to work out, right?
Yeah. I said it from the start. They should have been the Sentinels. I like that name.
That was one of the ones being considered, right?
They considered a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, we'll see.
I think you were ever happy.
You were just happy to keep them as a football team. I think you liked that, didn't you?
I thought it was something a bit different. Obviously, over on this side of the world, we're pretty okay with our football teams and our sports teams not having nicknames. So, kind of Washington football team just fit quite well for me. I didn't have any particular issue with it, but I appreciate there's some traditions that need to be upheld, so I appreciate why. But I was happy as Larry.
Before we get into the show, we should mention also that this show and every show this year is going to be brought to you by the Backpage Pub. That is the place to watch the NFL this season in Dublin, with a free pint on arrival if you pre-book your table. There'll be NFL quizzes every month, and also plenty of great food and drinks too, including a weekly hot wings challenge if you are up to the task, which include obviously food and drink prizes as well. But Dan, let's get straight into it then, and sort of look back at the off season for the Seahawks. You know, on paper, another successful draft. We obviously will see how that works out throughout the season. Some important additions in the free agency side of things, including the return of Bobby Wagner and Jaron Reed as well. But your thoughts on sort of this last offseason and sort of maybe the previous off seasons in what we've kind of seen in changes to approach and sort of rebuilding this team?
Yeah, tremendous amount of turnover. I think last I saw 45% of the current roster, the 53-man roster, are players in their first or second year, which is remarkable when you consider that this team is being generally talked about as a contending team. And just yet another national reporter came out this week, Sheil Kapata, and picked them to win the NFC West. He framed it as a bold prediction, but nonetheless, he's not the first one to say that they think the Seahawks are in line to challenge the 49ers in the division. And given the youth and the newness to the roster, it's remarkable. It's also remarkable considering that most of that came as a result of trading a franchise quarterback, which is so rare not as rare in the NFL as it used to be, but such a bold move, a move that doesn't come without risk. To be able to cash it in the way that they have. And I'm a very positive, optimistic Seahawk fan. I absolutely love their process. I love what they've done with the draft in the last couple of years. And even this year, taking a bigger swing than they're known for in free agency and bringing in Draymond Jones and signing him to a big deal to address a need. The jury's still out. There's some question marks about this rookie class in particular, because they haven't been healthy. 8 of the 10 draft picks have missed preseason games, and so there's a lot of unanswered questions. We don't know about Devin Witherspoon, if he's going to play on Sunday. We think we know about JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba, the other first-round pick, but we're not sure. But so many guys are banged up. Both the defensive linemen that were taken in the draft are banged up, and we don't know how healthy they'll be this week. So I think that's going to be a recurring storyline throughout the year, is how good this draft class looks, because certainly last year's was a slam dunk.
One player certainly not in his first or second year in the NFL, that is the quarterback, Geno Smith. He had a fantastic year last year, probably a career year for him. What is the expectation around? I know from the fans' point of view, Darren All are telling me he only is going to go higher and higher and higher. But what's the general consensus? Are the Seahawks looking for him to, hey, if he does what he did last year, we're going to be in a much improved team? Or do they need a little bit of an extra step up, given the rookie class, as you said, with any rookie class, it's touchy-feely about how they're going to play out over the course of the season?
Yeah, I'll take the second part of that question first. I think the Seahawks clearly believe in Geno Smith and showed that by giving him the contract that they gave him, and by what I believe altering their approach. I am convinced, and unless I can get a couple of pints in John Schneider someday, and he tells me otherwise, that when they traded Russell Wilson, they fully anticipated that at some point last year or this year, they would be drafting a quarterback and building around a young quarterback. I think they believed in Geno. They kept bringing him back. They kept saying during that first offseason that he was in the running when everybody else thought Drew Lock would be in line to be that guy. But I think he exceeded their expectations, and it changed their plan. As far as general consensus and expectations go, it depends on who you ask. Most Seahawk fans are Geno believers. There are still some skeptics. They want to see it again. They want to see it a second time, and that's reasonable. When a guy's been in the league that long and didn't have success early in his career, and then we don't see him play for 6 years, it's reasonable to expect that, hey, we need to see that again. Even Ryan Leaf, when I had him on my show last month, said, big Geno believer, but let's see it one more time. If he has another year like he did a year ago, then I think you're going to start hearing a lot more conversation about, is this guy, where does he fit in the league? Is he a top 10 quarterback? Opposing fans, none of them believe in Geno Smith, and they all think it was a flash in the pan and that he's trash and that he was a fluke. But what's been interesting this preseason is to see what the national media thinks, and people around the league and people who cover the league. They seem to have come around are very much believers. There was just another national list posted today by the 33rd team, where they ranked all 32 starting quarterbacks, and they had Geno 11th, just behind, actually had Jalen Hurts 10th, which I think is lower than most people feel like. But and in their synopsis, they said, look, everything this guy did on tape last year was legitimate. There was nothing fluky about what he did. So I think given the continuity in the offense, how many returning starters there are, and then some of the upgrades they made, a lot's being expected of Geno. And now we'll see how he deals with expectations. And whereas last year he got the luxury of being able to surprise people.
And then just to take it back to a point there where you started it, saying that they believe that at some point they'd be drafting a quarterback. And if we think back to the draft, obviously they had the fifth pick, and the consensus was coming out of the draft, if Anthony Richardson wasn't selected at 4, they were going to select him at 4. Do you think that was something that they were looking to do? And I guess then, does that mean that they are still sort of either in the market for a QB next offseason that's going to be possibly tradable or in free agency, or if they can get themselves a decent draft position, maybe look at someone there again?
It's the story that just won't go away, right? And we'll never know. And there's a fascinating alternate reality, alternate timeline that may have existed had they taken Anthony Richardson at 5. I do believe that they loved him. And the reason I believe that is because all you have to do is listen to this kid talk and hear about his work ethic and his personality and his presence in the locker room. And he just screams Seahawk. And I think the situation here would have been fantastic for Richardson. He wouldn't have had to play right away. I'm a little concerned that the Colts anointed him as a starter so soon. I think that might be a mistake. But I can see why they were enamored with him, especially given the weakness of the top of this draft class. In a perfect world, there would have been a dominant defensive lineman there at 5 who had characteristics and a personality and a work ethic that fit their culture, where Jalen Carter did not. And that was unfortunate. And there wasn't a second option there. So we'll never know about Anthony Richardson and what that might have done, the ripple effect that might have had on that draft class. But I do believe that no matter how well Geno plays this year, he's what, 32 now, 33. Like I think every single year, John says that they look for it. They've just never pulled the trigger on it. That they're going to be looking for their Jordan Love in the coming drafts. And I think next year it'll be a big storyline, because I think next year looks to be one of the deepest quarterback drafts in a very long time, because of all the guys that return to school. And if you look at the first weekend in college football, I mean, there's 20 names, 25 names. I think last year that opportunity wasn't there. There were 2 or 3 guys and then a massive cliff. There weren't enough players in the second, third, and fourth round that you could squint your eyes and see as a future starter to take a shot at. Next year there will be. I think it's going to be more layered, and there will be opportunities at the end of the first round, second, third round. They have that extra pick to maybe take their future quarterback. So we'll see. But I do believe that they really did like Richardson, and if he had been on the board there, he might have been the pick.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about Geno Smith and how he might play this year. How do you think the additions to the offense this year and playing with the existing guys that we have, and especially around the wide receivers, so we have DK, we have Lockett, now we have JSN, and potentially a pretty good option in Jake Bobo, who's quickly becoming a fan favorite. How do you think they fit in? What layers can they add? And how do you think all those additions affect the ceiling of this offense this year?
I think it makes the offense dynamic and dangerous enough that the improvements we're hoping to see out of the defense don't need to be dramatic. That I think this offense is going to prolong drives, be better on third down, and score more points, and be in a situation where they get off to fast starts and have more leads, and that kind of makes things easier on this defense while they continue to figure it out, especially with some young guys. I think Jackson Smith and Jigba is, and it's unfortunate that he got hurt, although it's looking positive that he may be able to play on Sunday, or at the very least that wrist injury isn't going to keep him out long term, which was the fear. I think he fits perfectly. He's the one thing, along with DK and Tyler, that they really didn't have, and that's that dynamic middle of the field slot guy that hurt him on third downs last year. I also think one of the things that I think is going to make this offense so much better is the upgrade at center. I think Evan Brown is a very solid NFL center, and then they went out and drafted a guy that could be the long-term answer in Oluwatimi. I think Austin Blythe was such a liability on that offensive line late in the year, and the combination of he and Gabe Jackson, who played half the snaps at right guard, that late in the season, when people want to talk about how Geno didn't play as well the last third of the season, I attribute a lot of that directly to the weakness in the interior offensive line. Teams just started picking on that, and that's where the pressure was coming from, was inside. I think we're going to notice that difference early in the season. That's just going to allow Geno to use all those weapons he has, because he's going to get time to throw.
Dan, what about the run game? You feel that's settled down this year, expecting another good year from Walker, and maybe any thoughts on Charbonnet, who's going to come in and probably back him up a little bit?
If they can stay healthy. I mean, that's always the thing. Schneider talked about it 2 days ago in his press conference. He talked about the year they had to bring Marshawn back late in the year because they lost 4 running backs in 10 days, and talked about the attrition of that position. And that's why they continue to invest draft capital in it, even though a lot of the analytical community doesn't like that approach. And Schneider even acknowledged that the other day. I thought that was fascinating. He said, I get the other side of the argument, but this is how we like to do it. If for all the talk of how good Charbonnet is, and I'm a big fan, that talk was starting to trend into, hey, by the second half of the season, he may be the lead back and Walker's a change of pace. I think that's ridiculous. I think Kenneth Walker, when healthy, can be a top 10, if not a top 5 back in this league. I think he's dynamic in all areas. And I think Charbonnet is the perfect complement to him. He's bigger. He's more physical between the tackles. That was something we didn't see early in the season last year from Walker. But once he started committing more to cutting it upfield instead of trying to bounce everything outside, we saw the difference. And then, We saw some Kenny McIntosh early in camp, and he was dynamic, especially when Charbonnet and Walker were nursing injuries, and then he gets hurt. So I think when all three of those guys are healthy, if we can get them all healthy at the same time, that by the end of the season, we'll be talking about it as the best young running back room in the draft. Really deep. And then you have DJ Dallas, the consummate pro, who's just a guy you can count on anytime you need some tough yards inside or to catch a pass. So if those guys are healthy, I think Walker's dynamic. And I think we're going to see that. And his name's going to be a lot more prominent around the league if he plays 17 games.
Yeah, and just to add on to what I was talking about a little earlier, we see the Seahawks really like on early downs, they really like 11 and 12 personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And a little later on, they might use a bit of 13, but the rest is kind of spread out a bit more. So they're a little bit predictable in that sense, that they're going to use those formations. Do you see, with all the talent they've added and with the potential of this offense, do you expect them to kind of vary that a bit more? Do you think Waldron has a bit more up his sleeve, that we'll see a bit more of a varied offense this year? Or is it more of what we've come to expect?
I do think we're going to see more. I think the one thing that we've seen from Shane Waldron his first couple of seasons coordinating this offense is he does seem to be developing as a play caller. We do see a progression and an evolution of the offense. Whereas his two predecessors in Schottenheimer and Bevel, I think the biggest criticism of those two guys as play callers was predictability and getting stuck in patterns. And we knew what was coming, and so did the offense. I think Waldron's a lot more sophisticated. And now, I mean, there's no excuses, right? This offense he should be the happiest guy in the room. This offense should succeed. There's really no glaring weakness. And he has a deep tight end group with all sorts of, three guys that have very different skill sets. He has a dynamic receiving group. We talked about the running backs, and the offensive line should be the best offensive line they've had since the Super Bowl years. There are no excuses to not be productive on offense. And so we'll see how he uses it. I hope that we see an offense that plays to its strengths and doesn't try to get too cute. We saw some of that early in his tenure. He was stuck on some of those Rams principles and trying to get Eskridge involved in the fly sweep and those kinds of things. But he's shown an ability to adjust within the game and get away from things that aren't working. And I think, again, he's going to have so many resources at his disposal this year. I think this offense is going to be varied, and I think they're going to be dynamic. And I don't think, it's funny how the reputation of the Seahawks offensively has been for years that they're run first to a fault, because every single year under Pete Carroll, and especially the last 3 or 4 years, they're among the league leaders, usually among the top 5 in early down pass rate. They like to throw early. And if they can do that again this year and keep defenses guessing, I think the sky's the limit. I think they can be a top 5 offense in the NFC. Certainly the AFC is a whole different animal, but I think they'll be one of the top 5 offenses in the NFC.
Shifting then from the offense to the defense, obviously the big problem last year on the defense was defending the run. I think I still have nightmares about that Las Vegas game, and Josh Jacobs was absolutely running everywhere on that pitch.
Yeah.
But they've allocated resources and put money onto that defensive line to help. And in the linebackers as well, I mentioned Bobby, the addition of Devin Bush as well. Jordan Brooks coming back a lot earlier than we thought we would see him. Yeah. And then obviously on the line itself, Jaron Reed coming back. They gave a lot of money to Draymond Jones. They drafted, Derek Hall. They got in Cam Young as well. And then obviously with the bodies that they've lost, with obviously the likes of Big Al Woods, just to name a few. Do you think that the right moves have been made by the team to solve these issues defending the run?
I know it may sound like a cop-out to say we'll see, but we'll see, because I still have concerns that they didn't add to the interior defensive line. I thought for sure, especially given the injuries to Young and Morris, that, but even before those, I was concerned, as much as I like those two guys, about putting so much on their shoulders to have to be part of that 5-6 man rotation from the get-go. And then when they got banged up, I thought, okay, at the very least, at the big cut down from 90 to 53, they're going to add bodies there. And they didn't. And Schneider talked the other day about how with the relaxed and expanded practice squad rules, teams are hanging on to those guys more. They're harder to get. But, trades can be made. Players are always available. I think it speaks to not just how good they feel about those players, but how good they feel about the next step that they think they're going to take with the scheme. They've talked about how last year was a tough transition year because they were trying to combine some new principles to the old scheme, and that there were some difficulties matching the coverage and the run fits in the secondary with what was going on up front. That's hard for fans to hear. They don't want to hear, because as fans, we think, we'll just coach it better. Like you're saying, guys were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Coach it better. But we saw results this preseason. I know people say that you can't really judge from the preseason, but sometimes it does translate. They were terrible last year in the preseason against the run, and we all brushed it off as, well, that's just preseason. It doesn't matter. And it carried over. This year, they give up less than 4 yards per play in the preseason. And they were much more consistent filling their gaps and stopping the run inside and outside. And it was coming from everywhere. The guys up front were in their gaps. The linebackers were shedding blocks and making plays. And the secondary was coming up in run support as well. And we weren't even seeing it with the starters. We saw 10 snaps out of Draymond Jones. We saw very few snaps out of Mario Edwards even, or Jaron Reed. So if those changes do take hold, Pete Carroll defenses have always been good against the run. So the sample size would seem to suggest that that's going to be fixed. If they are even a middle of the league defense for this year, then I think this talk of potential division championships and maybe contending in the NFC might not be too far-fetched.
And you sort of answered my next question there at the end. But in a perfect world, and everything works out, if guys like Jaron Reed, Cam Young, Mike Morris, if all those guys work out, and we have middle of the road or top 10 run defense, and we can build on the pass defense that was actually much better than in previous years last year. If all that happens in a perfect world, how do you think that affects where this team can go this year?
I think it's, and again, I qualify it by saying injuries, they got to stay healthy. The schedule's a little trickier in spots than I think it looked at first glance. I think there's some teams that maybe when the schedule came out, we thought might be easier wins or easier weeks that are starting to look more competitive now. But that being said, they won 9 games last year in the first year of a rebuild, basically with massive problems on defense. And while, the cynic can say, well, they pulled some of those games out at the end, there were some other games that they lost that they should have won, in my opinion. I think this team is at least 2 wins better than last year. I think it's an 11-win team as, I don't want to say floor, because, again, anything can happen, but that's what I expect. I think it's at least an 11-win team. And if everything really goes well and they stay healthy, they don't play the 49ers until November. And then they play them twice in, I think, a 3-week period. It's kind of an odd scheduling quirk. I didn't like it at first. I kind of like it now, because by the time we get there, I think those two teams are going to be, the Rams and Cardinals are going to be in the rearview mirror. They're going to be out of contention at the bottom of the division. And it's going to be a mad dash to the NFC West division. I think this team has a shot to win the division. I really do. And I don't even think they're done yet. I have viewed this since day one, and I continue to, that I still think they're one more year away, another good draft away from really putting themselves in a position to where they can be at the top of the NFC West long term and open up a window of contention. But I think they have a shot. I think it's an 11-win team.
Before we move on from the defense, I got a little question on the back end of that defense. It's two super exciting players, Kobe Bryant and Tariq Woolen from last season. I presume all expectations are they continue to grow their game. And then one of the guys that I think was certainly considered help in the run game in Jamal Adams, trying to keep him healthy. He's a heavy hitter safety. Is that going to be a key to this defense, or you think it's now got enough depth there where it can be worked around? Obviously, all injuries to star players are challenging, but do you think that the depth is there a little bit more this year to handle that?
I do, and I think that'll show up week 1, maybe week 2 or 3. You know, they're being very careful with Adams. They kept him off the PUP list. That allows him to practice, and it gives him the option of playing him in the first 4 games. But I don't think they're going to play him until they're 100% sure that he's ready to withstand the pounding. And I think when they do, I've been saying it, he's frosting on the cake. I think they've done a much better job this year of preparing themselves to play without Jamal Adams. And if he does get healthy and can contribute, it will be in a very specialized role, and they'll be fine one way or the other. And I think the biggest part of that is bringing in Julian Love, who I thought was a coup this offseason. I didn't think that was a guy that would be available at the number we got him, and that we'd even think about getting. He's such a luxury to have back there alongside Quandre Diggs that, hey, Jamal, when you can come back, and we're going to have you do what you do best. We're going to have you defend the run, move around, be a Swiss Army knife, rush the passer. We're not going to count on you to play every down and have to cover on the back end. And then as for the rest of the secondary, you mentioned some of those guys. I think the depth is outstanding, to the point that if Devin Witherspoon's healthy, and it looks like now Trey Brown is listed first on the depth chart, he's beat out Mike Jackson at left cornerback, and you got Tariq Woolen going into his second year, that Kobe Bryant is now listed on their depth chart as a free safety. And we saw some things this preseason that might indicate that could turn out to be a genius move. That, you know, Quandre's on the other side of 30 now. Julian Love's a versatile guy that can move around. He can play nickel. Kobe Bryant looks like a safety, and he was hitting guys and really surprised me with his range. And he may be better suited there than he was to outside corner. This depth in the secondary rivals what Pete had in 2013, which before they won the Super Bowl, they had to cut a bunch of guys at the end of training camp that went on to play roles for other teams because they were so deep they couldn't keep them all. I'm not saying it's as talented because that was a legendary group, but depth-wise, I think it compares.
Yeah. Let's look ahead to Sunday and the Rams. Obviously a huge NFC West matchup. Probably as the years have gone on, the team that I take the most pleasure in beating, and I take the worst when we lose against them, because it doesn't matter if, like last season, they have absolutely no one left to play the game. They still always run the Seahawks close, for sure. But coming into this game, Cooper Kupp is questionable at the moment with a hamstring injury. Yeah. We still don't know what sort of shape Matt Stafford is going to be in now he comes back. Obviously, there's been huge turnover on defense. It kind of looks, from an outsider's point of view, obviously I don't follow the Rams enough, but it kind of looks like it's Aaron Donald and 10 guys off the street on defense at the moment. But you know, your thoughts on the game this Sunday against the Rams, and I guess sort of what you could be expecting from the Rams this year, considering it seems though they are entering sort of a rebuild phase for the team.
Yeah, it's a lot to process when it comes to the Rams, that they just won the Super Bowl, you know, just over a season ago. I'm talking to a Rams reporter later today, so I'll be interested to get his thoughts from that angle. I loved how you framed what you said on defense, because I am not joking. I looked at their depth chart the other day and their starting lineup on defense. And as much as I cover this league, and I'm a draft nerd, so I mean, I don't pretend to know it all, but I get into it pretty deep. And there were literally starters on their defense that I've never heard of. I'm not kidding. And it makes sense because I saw a stat just today. Somebody posted on Twitter that 8 of their starters on defense are rookies who were drafted in the 6th round or later, or undrafted free agents. I mean, it is Aaron Donald and 10 other dudes. John Johnson is a safety that people will remember the name, but that's about it. It's remarkable. And we were saying, during that stretch where, their general manager kept saying that draft picks are overrated, and they kept making those moves for the big high price talent and paying those massive contracts. As opposing fans, we kept saying, well, eventually that'll come back to bite them. But it turned out to be wishful thinking. They go on and win a Super Bowl, and we're thinking, okay, maybe this can work. How completely and swiftly it has crashed to the ground for them is remarkable. It's Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, and then a bunch of dudes. Literally, that's it. And now Kupp's out. He's on the other side of 30, and he's seeing a specialist. I don't expect him to play on Sunday. And Stafford has had the elbow now for years, and now there's the report that he doesn't relate to his young teammates. I mean, I'm not sure why Sean McVay decided to come back after the week where he took some time to think about it last year, other than maybe he just really likes a massive challenge. If the Cardinals weren't intentionally trying to be as bad as they're going to be, the Rams might be in the running for the first pick in the draft. I think they're going to be terrible, and I think the Seahawks should. Anything less than an easy win going away on Sunday might be a disappointment.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit there about the Rams and the state that they're in. But let's talk a little bit about the NFC West overall. I mean, the Cardinals are a complete non-factor. I was looking at their depth chart yesterday, and speaking of defensive lines, LJ Collier is their first string defensive end there.
Yeah.
And
he says he's going to show the Seahawks though that they made it.
Oh yeah, I bet he is. Yeah, so they're not really in a brilliant position. So it's kind of down to the Seahawks and the 49ers, who as much as it pains me to admit, they are a very good team. How do you see the NFC West kind of falling this year?
I mean, I think it's a lot cloudier of a situation now than it should be. We don't know what the 49ers look like yet because Nick Bosa is not there. And he's such a massive part of what they do that goes even beyond, winning awards, being the defensive player of the year. He just drives everything they do. And they go out this offseason, they even add to a defensive line that we all thought was dynamic to begin with. And they bring in Javon Hargrave. But when you add Hargrave and take Bosa out of it, it's not as dynamic. And, they have a great linebacker crew, but there's questions in their secondary still, and questions. Their offensive line didn't play as well last year. And there's still, the jury is still out on Brock Purdy. What he did last year was remarkable, but we're talking about an 8-game sample size, and then he gets hurt. And as much as, they say he's healthy and he's 100% and everything else, arm strength was not his forte to begin with. And now he's coming off not Tommy John surgery, but elbow ligament replacement surgery. That's not a small deal. So I think there's some mystery surrounding how good they're going to be. Still, I mean, they've got weapons on offense. They've got Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. And they do have playmakers on defense and that linebacker group, and they do have guys up front. And so, again, the Seahawks and 49ers don't play until November. So if they get off to a shaky start, it gets really interesting in the division. I would expect, though, that they'll be okay, and that it's going to come down to November with those two teams neck and neck.
Yeah, they obviously play Pittsburgh on Sunday to start the season, and which can be a potential banana skin. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But
it's a mystery to me because Kenny Pickett's getting a lot of love in the preseason, and maybe it's the small hands, maybe it's the gloves. I don't know. I'm not a big Pickett believer, so that's one of the teams I'm most interested to see play because I just don't know what they are.
But see, to be fair, he was throwing against second and third stringers in the preseason. That's predominantly what the preseason is. So,
sure.
There would be a lot of cause for concern if he actually didn't play well in the preseason. But we'll have to obviously wait and see. The way the Steelers are, they always find like these mid-round wide receivers that turn out to be absolute beasts. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Was it Deontay Johnson and George Pickens there coming into his second year, and so he flashed a bit first year. Maybe he'll jump on, but we'll see for sure. But Dan, it's been a fantastic speech. Before we let you go, we need a prediction for Sunday. Are you kind of going with the form and thinking that this could be a bit of a blowout for the Seahawks in terms of a victory, or are the Rams going to do what the Rams always seem to do under McVay against Pete Carroll and keep this close and keep us having to bite our nails?
I don't know. Is Todd Gurley coming out of retirement and with healthy knees? Is Jalen Ramsey coming back? I just don't see it. I know there's some questions on defense. I think they're going to be fired up. It's going to be a beautiful day in Seattle in front of the home crowd and Bobby's return. And, all those guys on the field for the full time. Julian Love's another guy we only saw 10 snaps out of in the preseason. So I'm thinking something like 31-10, 31-13. I just don't know how the Rams score against the Seahawks unless Cam Akers really, really gets going. But I think they're going to be able to load up against him. Are you going to be scared of Matt Stafford throwing to Ben Skowronek and Tutu Atwell against our secondary? I just don't see it. I see at least a 2-score victory. And if it's anything less than that, then, this guy will be falling for sure. And we'll be talking about what's wrong with the Seahawks next week. It's been a long time since I felt this way going into an opener because there's so many unknowns, but I see an easy win.
That's the one person that you brought up. I totally forgot that he's gone now. Jalen Ramsey. I'm going to miss his little battles with DK now.
Yeah, right.
Twice a year.
So's DK because he was owning them the last couple of times.
Was his last act, I guess, as a Ram going up against DK, wasn't it? No, that was actually in SoFi, wasn't it? In the game of SoFi, that was
the game winner.
He got beat for the touchdown. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He got beat for that. But listen, Dan, it's like I said, it's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you. Before we let you go, for anyone that hasn't tuned into the Seahawks Forever podcast and they want to find it, where can they get it?
Yeah, I appreciate that. YouTube is most of the emphasis. Just type in Seahawks Forever and subscribe to the channel. I do 3 to 6 shows a week. It just kind of depending on breaking news and what's happening there. And then follow me on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, at Seahawks Forever, always for updates and everything else. And if you're an audio podcast listener, the show is on every platform out there. So I appreciate it.
Excellent stuff. Like I said, it's been great speaking to you.
Thanks, guys.
Hopefully you have a good season. I'm hoping. Obviously, we're all hoping, apart from Fionn, that we have a great season.
I'm optimistic. If you can't tell, yeah, I'm optimistic. And then next year we're just going to go draft 8 defensive linemen with all of our draft picks, and then we're going to be a juggernaut.
Well, there'll be a couple of linebackers there,
or maybe a quarterback in there somewhere. Yeah,
I'm still mad about Ivan Pace. Still mad that
well, it's interesting you mentioned the Steelers. One of the reasons I'm going to be watching them this year is because they have 2 guys that the Seahawks were tied to because Nick Herbig has had a really nice preseason too, but Keanu Benton was a guy that I absolutely loved. And I think when Schneider talked about upsets on the second day of the draft and before the Charbonnet pick, Benton went 3 picks before. I think that was the guy. I think he would have been a game changer in the middle and allowed Reed to stay at defensive end. And he's been a beast so far in the preseason. That's one that might be the Creed Humphrey pick of this draft that we look back on and regret later on. So Charbonnet better be good.
Sick of hearing about Creed Humphrey. it's we're done with that.
It's only going to stop if Oluwatimi turns out to be a long-term starter. But that was a big miss.
There is I'm assuming you might have heard of Duke Manyweather. I mean, when Oluwatimi was picked, Duke Manyweather said that's Seattle's center of the future.
Yeah, a lot of people do feel that way. Yeah,
that's Seattle's center of the future.
Agreed.
Hopefully you guys are right. But like I said, that's where we're going to wrap up this edition of the show. And we are only a couple of days away from the start of the NFL season. So make sure you are sticking with us here on the Under Center podcast for all the latest reaction interviews and shows as the season progresses. If you haven't already, like this video on YouTube and subscribe to the channel if you want to listen to us on the go. Under Center Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Under Center Pod as well. So make sure you're following us on them too. So Fionn, Al, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And until next time, stay safe and we'll see you soon.